Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Steelman, Director of Alumni Career Development and Professional Engagement for William Mary, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to William Mary's sixth annual Professional Development Week. William Mary is your career partner for life. The university has committed to lead in the preparation of lifelong learners equipped to navigate rapid change and thrive from their first job to their last. This week of programming designed for the entire William Mary community will cover a variety of topics relevant to people at all points of their career journey. When designing the sessions, we focused on the NACE career competencies, which are career and self development, communication, equity and inclusion, leadership, professionalism, teamwork, and technology. We are truly grateful for the continued engagement of our William Mary community to support one another's professional success. I want to acknowledge and thank all the William Mary volunteers and colleagues who expressed their willingness to help on One Network, have taken the time to prepare remarks, advise us on topics, and are serving as networking event hosts for the William Mary community in cities throughout the country. Without your guidance, support, and expertise, this week would truly not be possible. I'd like to also thank my colleagues across campus who helped us with the marketing, planning, and preparing of this week. It takes a team to pull this off, and we were fortunate to have such a talented and hardworking planning committee help with so many moving pieces. Lastly, I want to extend my gratitude to my co-planners, Kelly O'Shaughnessy and Alex Beard, who you'll hear from later this session. Alex, Kelly, and I have been meeting since the fall to curate a week of relevant topics and learning objectives for our William Mary community. Now, before I turn things over to our guest presenter, I just have a few technology items to cover. Today's session is being recorded, and we will notify all of our registrants once the recording is available. Also, questions are welcome. And Oz has agreed to do a Q&A after his remarks, so please use the Q&A feature and I will help moderate the questions during that time. If you roll over the bottom portion of the Zoom window, you'll see that Q&A icon appear. Now we are delighted to have kick off this week the William Mary Class of 1999 alumnus and Managing Vice President of Global Supply Chain at Capital One, Oz Parvaiz. Oz has intentionally developed a career rooted in a passion for creating positive impact for both his business and his community. He believes that our businesses are only as strong as the communities in which we operate, recruit, and live. As you listen to Oz's remarks, we encourage you to think about ways you can proactively develop yourself and your career through continual personal and professional learning, awareness of your strengths and weaknesses, navigation of your career opportunities, and networking to build relationships within and without your organization. We are grateful to have Oz join us to inspire us all to explore ways we each can improve the lives of those around us and empower our teams to achieve audacious goals together. Without further ado, Oz Parvaiz.
Michael, thank you so much. And thank you to the William and Mary community for having such incredible events. And it's such an honor to be a part of this. Before I start about some of the lessons I've picked up throughout my career, I wanted to start by introducing myself to you. So my name is Oz Parvaiz, and on this slide, you see my family. My family is very, very important to me. On the left side is my son. This picture is a little older, so he is now 15. I think he's about 8 or 9 in this picture. And he's our oldest child, and his name is Mikhail. And Mikhail is very talkative. He's very compassionate. He plays music and writes songs and believes that the world needs to be fair. And my wife Adila and I, as a compliment, always like to say, that the world does not deserve Mikhail. On the top right, you see a young girl shooting a basketball, and that's my daughter, Misha. And Misha, in contrast, is very quiet, very focused, fiercely competitive. She's an incredibly skilled basketball player, knows exactly what she wants. And as a compliment to her, my wife and I always say that the world completely deserves Misha. Misha will rule the world as soon as she can. On the bottom right, you see a picture of me and my wife, Adila, and this is date night. And with us is our golden doodle, Bolt, or as we call him, the favorite child in the family. Just to give you an idea of where Bolt exists in the ecosystem of the Parvaiz family, This is date night, and the human children are being babysat by the grandparents while the golden doodle child is with us. So he is very, very special to us. In the middle picture is me and my extended family, my parents, my brothers, and my nephew. And family, as I mentioned, is incredibly important to me and something that I've kept very close to me, especially as I've grown my career. And I've been very fortunate to be close to family and also very fortunate to have a long career since I graduated from William and Mary. And I'm at that point now where the next group of people that will join Capital One out of college were born the year that I joined Capital One. So I get questions all the time now about Oz, what are the things that helped you along your career? What are the lessons you picked up and learned along the way? And those are the lessons that I wanted to share with you today. There are a few of them, and I'll start now. The first lesson is to own your story. This picture is a picture of my wife, Adila. We've been married for 20 years. And when we got married, our honeymoon, we decided to go on a cruise. And if you've been on a cruise, you know that for dinner, you're actually seated at a table with people you don't know. And my wife and I sat at that table. And I remember we'd been married for a few weeks. And Adila started sharing stories about herself, about me and her. And she told the table almost everything about us. And I remember just watching and keeping up, trying to keep up with Adila. And then something very fascinating happened in the next few minutes. The people around the table started sharing their stories. And a few hours later, it felt like a group of friends having dinner together. When Adila and I were walking back to our cabin, I remember looking at her and saying, so do we do this as a couple? Is this how we function? Will we be sharing our stories with everyone? And as you can imagine, I was just learning. We were learning about each other as a couple. And at that moment, she said something very profound to me for someone in their mid-20s. She said, Oz, if we don't own our stories, then other people will own them for us. From that day onward, I started sharing more about myself with people around me. And I found that through those stories and sharing personal stories about oneself and hearing other people's stories, one builds relationships that I had never built before. And those relationships are the ones that have continued in my career at Capital One. I'm going to be celebrating my 25th year coming up in June. And I tell everyone that I'm happy and I'm happy at work. And that's because of the people around me. I'm surrounded by people I care about and love, and people that care about and love me as well. And one of the stories I still tell to this day is about meeting and falling in love with a woman who taught me how to own my story and to share it. The next lesson is nice guys don't finish last. So early on in my career, I was often told that I was too nice. I was too nice, and maybe I wouldn't make the tough decisions. I was too nice, and maybe I wouldn't be able to set difficult, challenging goals. And there's a lot of baggage that comes with telling a man that he is too nice. We even have a phrase in the English language that goes, nice guys finish last. And I remember at that point in my career, this is the early 2000s, I decided that, I was gonna perhaps try something different. And I created whatever caricature of a captain of industry that I could come up with. And I decided I'd be a little less nice. And I also found during that time period, I was probably the most unhappy in my career. I sleep very well at night usually, and I couldn't sleep well at night. And I even developed stomach pain. And at around about this time period, I'd had my first child. And this picture here is actually a picture of my dad and my brothers, and I'm in my dad's lap. So around this time period, 2005, the picture that you're seeing here is from 1979, but in 2005, when I was grappling with being too nice or not too nice, my dad and I were hanging out on the weekend, and my son, I remember, was actually crawling on the floor, and I told my dad about the feedback I was getting at work. And he very quietly just he's never given me advice, but he started talking about my brothers and I when we were younger. And he said, your older brother was always he was like an adult since he was a kid. So as we grew up, he's always been almost a peer to your mother and I. Your younger brother was always a rascal, and he grew up to be a rascal. He was the one that bought a motorcycle and didn't even tell us. And now, actually, he's a teacher, but he's a teacher that rebels against the system and helps his students learn about physics and other things in very different ways. But when he looked at me, my dad said, "You were always our, we used to call you our sweet boy. And you always wanted to make sure that people were included in conversations, friends were included in playtime. And I'm not surprised that our sweet boy grew up into a nice man." And I remember when he said this to me, I was looking at my son, and if you have children, if you're an uncle or an aunt, or if you have friends with children, it is an amazing thing to see a child grow up. My son and my daughter came with their personalities, and those personalities have grown over time. So in that moment, I told myself that being nice was as much a part of me as the color of my skin, and it was something that I wasn't going to change. And I decided not to, and I've embraced it very strongly. I'm probably the most stubborn, nice man alive at this point because I make sure I'm kind in every interaction that I have with people around me. And what that's led to is a lifetime of strong relationships and networks and spaces that I'm invited into to solve problems because I show up with the intent to help. I'm often called into offices to help with problems that I have nothing to do with because somebody trusts me enough to engage. And that's been something that has really helped me through my career. At this point in my career, I tell people that being nice is not a weakness at all. It is actually a superpower. And I advise folks and encourage them to hold on to their authentic selves. The next lesson is set your goals higher than you can meet them, and then challenge yourself to grow into the person who can. This picture is a picture of a close friend now and a former manager and mentor, Yusuf Larish. And he was my manager at a very important point in my career. Often in my career, I've had those moments where I felt like my career was going to end because something so challenging was in front of me that I didn't think I could actually meet it. And one of the first times that happened was again around 2007, 2008. Yusuf was my manager, and we as a team were having a lot of process and mistakes and breakdowns. And I remember Yusuf meeting with me and saying, "Oz, we need to reduce the number of errors we have in our processes by 50%." And I remember thinking, there's no way we can do 50%. I'd looked at all the data and I told Yusuf, I was like, "Yusuf, we can't hit 50%. There's nothing in the data that tells me we can hit 50%. But he held his ground and he said, "Oz, 50. We're going to hit 50." I begrudgingly agreed and then started working with my teams to figure out how do we get to 50%. And as we started thinking about it, we realized that we had to change the way we did everything. We had to actually rethink the way we did our work. And as we did that, we actually found a way to get past 50%. We actually reduced errors by 90%. And in that experience, what I learned was that data is really important. It tells you where you've been and where you are. However, it won't always tell you where you need to go. For that, you need intuition. You need to rethink how the world works. And you need to reimagine the way you do things. And I started internalizing actually something a professor of mine told me in college, which was he asked me once, Oz, his name is Professor Davis. I went to Darden for my MBA program. And he asked me once, Oz, when you drive your car, do you drive looking through the windshield or do you drive looking through the rear view mirror? And that stayed with me. So all of these challenges that we face along the way in our careers, I now believe whenever you feel like you're going to fail, it's really success in disguise. It's a moment in time that is challenging you to become bigger and better than you are today. If you're an athlete, you know what I'm talking about. No athlete starts off by saying, "I'm going to run 26 miles." You start off by saying, "My goal is 26 miles." And in that, now I know that the goal isn't always there for us to meet it. The goal is there for us to think about things differently. So today, when my teams and I set our goals, we usually do it in September. We have this conversation, and I've set this expectation with my teams, but the conversation we have is, at what point does the goal really, really scare you? And that's the point at which we set the goal. So the lesson here is, set your goals higher than you can meet them and challenge yourself to grow into the person who can. The next lesson is seeking out conflicting advice. This is a picture actually of me at graduation at William and Mary in 1999. On the right is my dad, and the left is my mom, and both of them could not be any more different from each other. My dad is very unassuming, very quiet. I grew up playing cricket, so it's a bat and ball sport. And I remember he used to always tell me while I was batting, Oz, you have a lot more time than you think to play that shot. And I remember thinking as a kid, Dad, I have less than a second to play that shot. I don't know what he's talking about. But as I grew older, I understood what he meant. Take your time. You have more time than you think. In contrast, my mom is dynamic and forward-leaning and a very exciting person. There is a Chinese proverb that says there are only two times to grow or to plant a seed to grow a tree. The first time was 20 years ago. The second time is today. My mom could have written that proverb. So I wake up every morning, and I, like my mom, because of my mom, I put everything into every single day. And if the day doesn't go that well, and at the end of the day, it hasn't gone the way I expected, because of my dad, I tell myself, you've got tomorrow and you've got time. I share that very specifically because the lesson I picked up in that is to find mentors that are different from you. My parents couldn't be any more different than each other, and goodness came from that. So today I often look for mentors that are different. What is something unique they bring and they can teach me that I actually don't have? I shared with you Yusuf's picture earlier. He's someone who he and I are very close. We don't work at the same company anymore, and he and I are actually catching up for coffee tomorrow. And he's very different from me. He's quieter, he's more serious, he's more introspective. But together, we actually are able to connect and teach each other a lot more. So I encourage folks, always seek out conflicting advice. Seek out mentors that are different from you, because they'll teach you something different. The next lesson is keep an open mind. This is a picture of me in 1997 in DuPont. So this is an old picture. You see Sam Sadler on the right. He used to be our Vice President of Student Affairs. And then on the bottom left, you see Lee Kurland at the time, Lee Parfait now. And I shared this picture because my senior year of college, Lee and I were very close friends. She was a year older than me. We're actually still friends. She lives in my neighborhood down the street. And Lee graduated a year before I did. And in my senior year in college, I took the LSATs because I thought I was going to law school. And I took the LSATs, and at some point, I'm headed that same day down to the University Center, now called the Sadler Center, to grab dinner. And in front of me in the Sadler Center, I see Lee. And Lee had graduated the year before. So I look at Lee, I'm like, Lee, what are you doing here? And Lee says, oh, I'm recruiting with my company. So I tell Lee, hey, when you're done with your recruiting pitch and when you've met with all the students, how about you and I catch up and go to the Greenleaf or go to Paul's and catch up? And she says to me, hey, I'll do you one better. Why don't you come to the recruiting event? We have free food there, and you'll get free food. And as a college senior, that's like you say free food, and I'm showing up. And I walk in, and it's a Capital One event. I hadn't heard of Capital One until that moment. But I'm sitting and I'm watching and I'm listening to this incredible new company that has just gone public, talking about changing banking, and I get really excited. And at some point at the end, Lee says, "Why don't you apply?" And just as a reminder, I'd just taken my LSATs. I'm thinking about going to law school, and I think to myself, why not? Why don't I apply? And 25 years later, I'm still here at this amazing company where I've made amazing relationships. And I remind myself all the time to hold on to the naivete of youth, that you can take your LSATs, you can walk to the cafeteria, you have an open enough mind to then switch and go to a recruiting pitch, and then have an open enough mind to actually say, why not? Let me think about it. So just holding on to that openness and holding on to the naivete of youth, as I mentioned, my naivete of youth has been something that's been really, really important for me throughout my career. So the lesson is always keep an open mind. This is a lesson, take care of yourself, which I added more recently over the last 4 or 5 years. We all went through COVID together in many different ways, but we went through it together. And I remember when I was working from home, I was in front of my computer for so long that at some point I started feeling down, and I couldn't explain why. I'm incredibly optimistic. I love being surrounded by energy, and I felt down. And I remember talking to my wife about it, and I told her that, hey, it's strange. I can't explain it, but I'm not feeling like I usually feel. And she said, hey, well, you sit a lot more than you did before, so why don't you just get up and go for walks while you're taking your calls? So I start doing that, and I realize it's helping. I start finding out that, hey, if I mix a few things together, such as walking and meetings, I started feeling much better. And then over time, I've been a lot more careful about taking care of my health and making sure I'm working out and eating the right foods. And this picture is a picture of me and my family playing basketball, and surrounding myself with people I care about. And often with my team, I ask them and encourage them to keep very clear boundaries so that work is work and then home life is home life, and try to, as much as hard as it is, try to make sure that when you're focused on your work, stay focused on your work, and then at some point switch over to your personal life. And I am very fortunate to work at a company where I can say what I'm going to say right now. Capital One is an incredible company, and it takes care of me and it takes care of my family. And I know if God forbid something happened to me, and I'm very healthy, so knock on wood, nothing will, but God forbid something happened to me, my company will probably find someone to do my job 6 months, 6 weeks from now. But what my company cannot do is send a replacement dad for my kids, or a replacement spouse for my wife, a replacement best friend for my dog. So I often tell my teams that make sure that at the end of the day, when it's 5:30, 5:45, you turn that computer off, because there's somebody on the other side of that door who's waiting for you. And they're waiting to tell you about their day, the good parts of their day, the bad parts of their day. There's someone out there waiting for you to take them for a walk. So turn off your computer and go be with them. Make sure you take care of yourself, because I find the more I take care of myself, the more focused I can be at work, the more I can drive energy at work. So making sure those boundaries exist is really, really important. This is the last lesson, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. The meaning of life. And I know that is somewhat, it's a question that so many of us ask. But this is a painting of my best friend made this painting for me. He was at William and Mary Law School when I was in my undergrad. And when I graduated, this was his gift to me. And it is how he described it. It is primary colors on white, because he used to always tell me, as a compliment, I think, that you're easy to figure out. You know, like whatever is there is there. And he gave me this painting, and I remember I carried this painting and put it in my apartment for many years. At some point, I got married, and my wife's tastes are better than mine, so this painting ended up, as much as I love this painting, it ended up in the attic. Many years passed by. Stephen lived in Richmond as well, and he and our kids would go to the science museum and things like that. And one night, many years later, I was at our holiday party, at Capital One's holiday party, with my wife, and it's about 10 p.m. on a Saturday evening, and I get a phone call from Stephen's wife. And I look at it, I'm like, this is really strange. It's 10 p.m. on a Saturday, and I wonder why Jeanette is calling me. And I answer the phone, and she just says it. She says, "Hey, Stephen has died. He lived with an irregular heartbeat his whole life that we didn't know about, and he passed away. And a few weeks later, a few days later, actually, during his service, she asked me to speak at his service. And I was his best man a few years before that. And I spoke at his service as well. And I cried more than I've ever cried as an adult. And I remember then going home and going up to the attic and getting this painting. And I put it up in my office. Actually, it's behind me. You can't see it right now. And I keep this painting. And I keep it because whenever I'm having a really bad day, and I have those days, I have days whether something didn't work out at work or something didn't work out in my personal life, something even simple like the presentation didn't go the way I expected it to go. Um, and and if I'm in that moment where I feel like I'm losing and um, I'm not doing well and the day is not going well, I look at this painting and I tell myself that I'm still here. I'm still here and Stephen isn't. And as long as I'm here, I have a fighting chance. And I keep looking at this painting for that reason. And when we're younger, and when I was younger, I asked that question a lot, the question that is on the slide, what is the meaning of life? And after Stephen has died, I don't ask that question anymore because I know the answer. For me, the meaning of life is life itself, all of life, like the good parts of it, the bad parts of it, the happy parts of it, the sad parts of it, friends coming, friends going, all of it is just this immense, incredible gift that we all have. I try to tell people, or I try to tell myself, and I reflect on the just expanse of the universe and the billions of years on either side of each of us being born and the amazing miraculousness of the 50, 60, 70, 80 years that we get in all of that. And the fact that we get to interact with each other, interact with on this call with everyone is an incredible, incredible gift. So the meaning of life is life itself for me. And those are the lessons, Michael, that I've picked up over my lifetime. There are many more, of course, but these are the ones that I wanted to share today. And I'll pause there and we can go into Q&A.
I'm speechless. I don't, that doesn't happen very much, but thank you. What a powerful 30 minutes. I could not have thought of something more powerful and more rich of just genuine perspective about your life. And thank you so much for sharing it. I know it takes a lot to share what you did, but you got me crying here. I definitely had some Kleenex going through it. There are some moments where you have those ups and you have those downs, and we all have been through those. And I can't think of anything more important to set us up for a great week of helping support one another, navigating our careers together, asking questions together. And with that, I'm going to throw it out to the audience to share some takeaways, if you don't mind, in the chat. I'm sure Oz would enjoy that. He loves it's hard for a room where you don't see anybody. But as you can tell, Oz is a very dear to people, and he enjoys the interactions with people. So he would love to see some of your takeaways to kind of enjoy where we go. And then if you have a question, we have about a half an hour. We'd love to ask as many questions. Oz has kindly said that no question is out of bounds. There any question he's happy to take. And you can just use the Q&A feature in the Q&A button here. And we'll take a minute here just to let you gather some questions. Actually, we have some questions. Oz, how do you keep up the morale of your teams that are going through changes and downsizings as companies change? Obviously, you all are exploring some changes in the company, but there are things that happen throughout all industries, and especially nowadays more than others. Could you just reflect a little bit about the morale piece around your team management?
That's a very good question, specifically during tough points in the economy. So I'll focus on that part of the question, and then if folks have follow-up questions around in general, how do you manage morale? I'll specifically answer the question around how do you manage morale during downsizing. So being clear and direct is very, very important, and putting things into perspective relative to the types of careers we're in. So I share with folks that we have, as in myself and my peer set, have picked careers in finance. and have picked careers in business. And the way finance and business works is every 10 to 15 years, a recession will come. It has been like that for the last hundreds of years, and it will be like that for the next, as long as the economic system continues working the way it does. And that is a risk of being in the field that we pick, that happens. And for me, it happened in 2001. 2008 was severe. 2020 was very unique and different, but it felt recessionary. Um, so that perspective is important. And the second one is just to be very clear about the decisions a company is making and the decisions I am making, and owning those decisions and sharing those with the team. Um, the last part is to do it in as kind a manner as possible, because when you are taking someone's job away, you're taking their livelihood away. And to remind the teams that that is what you're doing, and that the person's livelihood that you're taking away has a family, they have a life, and it feels like your life is ending. It has happened to me in 2008. I lost my job as a part of downsizing. So I know how it feels. So to remind the person of that and to make sure that you're doing it in a way that is compassionate and kind. And then the last piece is to be there for that person throughout that process, to help them find a job somewhere else, to help them navigate their networks, to provide your networks to them. I get thank you cards now and then, and I don't save all of them, but I've saved all the ones of folks on my teams where I had to make a really difficult job decision. And usually a few months later, they'll send me a card thanking me for helping them find another job somewhere else. So it's something I take very seriously, and it's the hardest part of one's job. It should be the hardest part of your job. And if you pick finance or any like business path, every 10 or 15 years, you'll go through a really hard time. So I'll close with advice my dad gave me, which was, hey, you're going into finance. I wish you a long career. And if your career is very successful and long, you will see 3 recessions and you will likely lose your job in one of them. So just be ready for that. I'll pause there.
Sounds like your dad was an amazing individual
Oh,
too. So
he is
you,
amazing.
thank you so much for these, I mean, incredible lessons. I know that people are commenting that about, you haven't had a chance probably to digest all of it, but there's some really wonderful comments in the chat as when you get a chance. I'll send them to you as a follow-up too, because people have really enjoyed this conversation. Switching gears a little bit, talking a little bit about um, uh, reflection. And I'll be curious as to how you handle reflection, whether you journal or whether
Mm.
you do other things at the end of the day. Sometimes with your family, you can maybe you reflect around things together as what you learn together. But I'm curious lessons that you do to keep your mind focused on the values that you set each day, an activity that might be something that people could take away.
Michael, I have started a routine over the last 5 or 7 years. And I'll share the routine, and then I'll share the why I've come up with that routine. Um, as much as I like to self-reflect, as much as I like to slow things down, I'm probably more like my mom than I'm like my dad. So it's hard. If you tell me, Oz, go for 1 hour of yoga, I'd be, wow, that's too long. If you tell me, Oz, do meditation for 45 minutes, I'll be like, "Man, I can't do 45 minutes of meditation." So what I've done is I've created a routine where every morning, and I did this morning, for 5 minutes, I do gratitude meditation. And you can do this anywhere. You can do this in the Calm app. You can do it on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and you can search for 5 minutes of gratitude meditation, and some of the best content is out there. And then I stretch for 15 minutes, and I have a routine of different stretching exercises that I have. That's how I start my morning. I try to end it with some kind of physical activity. I used to be a lot more planful of that when the kids were younger, because I had to go to the gym, right? The kids were too young to play sports with me, but now that they're 15 and 13, we're playing tennis anytime he wants to. We're playing basketball anytime she wants to. So putting the physical activity in there is less planful, but the morning routine is very planful and happens almost every morning.
Awesome. I love it. The journal, gratitude journal, and just being athletic and exercising as much as you can. That's the key. As much as you can do with a little bit of everything. Um, Question about for those sort of just starting their professional journeys, what advice would you give them in their first step? What would be one thing that you would do? I mean, it's hard to say just one thing, but
Oh my
if there
God.
was that soon to be May graduate about to cross the podium and get their diploma, what would you advise them as they enter the workforce?
If you asked me to summarize, if you said, "Hey, Oz, all of your successes, if you were to pick one thing, what it would be," I'd say relationships. Um, Make sure you take care of people around you, and make sure you do that, and make sure you keep the relationship no matter who the person is, and try your hardest to maintain the relationship for a bunch of reasons. One is everybody rolls back into your life. The longer you live, you realize, man, people come in and out, and that ends up being really, really important. I uh, I remember I remember learning that lesson from a friend of mine. His name was Gautam Puranik, who at a very early stage in my career helped me with a presentation I was giving to an executive, my first executive presentation, and he helped me, and he didn't get any credit for it, but he got my friendship, and I from that day just helped as many people as I could. And I actually remember during the Great Recession when I lost my job, the way I found my jobs, the way I refound a job was just luck. Like I was in Manhattan one day looking for a job and ran into a friend of mine I was actually interviewing somewhere, and I ran into a friend of mine who I wasn't even interviewing with, and he gave me a job. The Great Recession was long and hard, so I lost my job two times in that recession. When I lost that job again, I remember finding my second job because I was in a cafeteria somewhere, and a manager of mine 15 years earlier came and tapped me on the knee and said, "What are you up to?" And I said, "Looking for a job." And that job actually was the hiring manager of that job was the guy I just mentioned, which was Gautam Puranik. So relationships, that is it. Like, don't sacrifice the relationship, invest in it, take your time with it. Um, Life is all about people, no matter what career you pick.
Love it. Relationships are so critical, and they're what give us the opportunity to enjoy things and to work more collaboratively and accomplish more together. What kind of along the lines of relationships, mentorship. You spoke greatly about your mentor and friend, and I'm sure you have many more and have mentored many. What qualities would you suggest mentees look for in a potential mentor? And I would also add an additional piece to that question: what qualities should mentors for in mentees to be the best mentor to that person so that they can genuinely be a good mentor? Because I think sometimes there's this idea that it's only a one-way relationship, but it truly is, as you know, the two-way opportunity.
The mentee looking for the mentor for me always was, is there something I admire in the person that I may not have myself? So there's a guy named Trip Hall who ended up being our chief risk officer at Cap One, and he was amazing at listening. And he was amazing with long silences, which I struggled with. When like there's open space and quiet, I feel like I need to fill it always. And he was so good at that, especially in really challenging conversations. Um, Whatever those conversations were, he was just so effective at it that I actually remember reaching out to him. I worked for him for a little bit, but I reached out to him and told him once that, "Hey, I really admire that about you. I'm going through something similar. Can I find 25 minutes with you and just talk through it with you?" And from there, once every few years, I'll reach out to him and set up some time just to catch up. So find a reason you want someone to mentor you. Like the thing that I tell people not to do is don't do the I need mentorship every 6 weeks and I'm going to schedule something with somebody to do that. Don't do it. Nobody has time for that. But be very deliberate about what you want to learn. And if you're tired with your learning, then that conversation becomes really easy. The flip side of it is, as a mentor, I look for people who want to learn, and are looking for learning and are forward leaning. And I look for what they bring into the conversation, because the conversation is for them. And uh, so be very thoughtful about how you want to do that. Now, I'll share how I manage mentorship in my life. Um, I don't have any ongoing meetings with anyone. But what I do is people that I care and admire about, I make sure I meet with them at least once or twice a year. And it's usually natural and organic. And I'll reach out and I'll say, hey, it's been a little while. I'd love to catch up again, and the answer is always yes. So be deliberate and thoughtful about it, but not too planful about it, because there's a lot of goodness that comes from learning organically. So anyway, the short answer is look for people that you can learn from, and try to connect with them regularly enough. Once or twice a year is usually good enough, but make sure there are 4 or 5 of those people so that you're actually meeting 10 times with some pretty amazing people.
This is truly amazing. I'm loving every every piece of your remarks. What tools do you or techniques do you do in managing your relationships? Because I think you do an amazing job at that. And obviously, I love this idea of letting your mentorship be more not so structured, but still structured. You probably set reminders or something to do. How do you do it? What techniques do you? I mean, I loved your tips on health and wellness. What would you recommend as an easy or simple first step towards managing relationships effectively?
Well, the simplest with the mentorship piece is at the beginning of the year, I kind of do my regular, uh, who have I not met with in a long time, and I'll make my list, and then I'll go ahead and schedule them. So it's really simple. The more specific part of the comment is I've always, and from here, maybe we can even talk about how do you planfully manage your career. But I've always been very thoughtful about what I wanted out of my career. And it's always started off with 10 years from now, I want to be this something. For me, it's a lot closer now than 10 years, but at some point 10 years ago, I said, I want to be COO of a Fortune 500. Um, and then I worked back from there and said, to do that, I need operations expertise, I need regulatory expertise, et cetera. And I made that list. And then with that list comes a list of people who can teach me those things. So then, like, who are those people? And then when I meet with those folks, I share my career aspirations. They give me ideas. That gives me ideas of what my next job should be. And then I get a good sense of what my next job should be. And then I ask for it. The thing that I'll say to you point blank is know what you want and then ask for it. Nobody is sitting around figuring out what should like nobody's trying to figure out what my career should be. Nobody's trying to figure out, oh man, Oz would be great in that job. The only person, I mean, there are people there to take care of you and elevate you and make sure you're doing well. But the one most important person in managing your career is you, you know? So do it. Don't expect, one of my favorite phrases is don't wait for the cavalry to come. You are the cavalry. Don't wait for don't wait for air cover. You are your own air cover. So that concept of know what you want out of your career, ask for it, and figure out who will be who will be able to give that to you, and start meeting with those people.
Wonderful. You know, I'm curious too along the relationship piece. I think a little bit about how um, interns in particular. We have a great session tomorrow on interns, and I'm curious from what advice we are very William Mary is doing a lot around applied learning, experiential learning around internships. And what advice would you give a current student embarking in an internship this summer or right now to get the most out of relationships? Because I think that's a critical moment to realize the power of relationships. And what advice would you give those coming to Cap One for an internship or any company out there? And what would you recommend? Because I think it'll be great for tomorrow's session too, some ideas.
So for an internship, very specifically, I'll step back for a second and I'll answer the question more specifically. I found that the most successful people have a combination of two things. They're warm and they're competent. And the competence piece is critical. And those two things have to come together. So as an intern, as you get into your internship, make sure you have a very clear idea of what is the problem your manager and your team is trying to solve that you're there for, and work as hard as you can to solve it that summer, as much as you can. Um, and then with your warmth, get to know some more people. But as an intern, I'd start off with the solve the problem. Because when you solve the problem, the credibility you'll build with that set of folks is your first strong relationships. The thing is, when you leave, let's say you get rehired by that company. That's awesome, and then build your career over time. If you don't get rehired by that company, keep those relationships. Like keep connecting with those people, because the world is small and opportunities keep coming up. The world is small and life is long, and you'll come across all kinds of people that you've interacted with. So the internship advice is just rock the problem, solve the problem, and get to know the folks on your team.
Wonderful. And by the way, for those power of relationships that we've chatted about for the past 10 minutes or so, and obviously in your stories, there are so many relationships that you shared. One Network, for those that haven't yet joined, is our William Mary place for building relationships. So little shameless plug, but why not? We're here to connect and network and support one another with careers. You'll hear more about One Network and Alex Beard on our team who's driving that. But certainly encourage those to check out onenetwork.wm.edu to help support one another and find those relationships that Oz is mentioning. Switching gears a little bit, what was the most persistent problem or obstacle that you have faced? And what were some keys to overcoming it, especially when just telling yourself to buckle down and get it done is not always enough?
Yeah, totally. I've actually deliberately chosen to change jobs every 2.5, 3 years. So because I've gone to different jobs every 2.5, 3 years, I can now draw a line through all of those and say, hey, what was the thing that I faced first? And it's always culture. Uh, there's this phrase that culture eats strategy for breakfast every morning. That is true, and it's played out in my career. So generally, I've generally asked for teams that are going through tough times. So um, when I land on a team, I often find that the key ingredients of success aren't there. And for me, those ingredients are the team needs to have a higher sense of purpose. Like, why are we here as a business? And you mentioned, like, my higher sense of purpose is to take care of our communities, because that's where we live, that's where we recruit, and that's where our customers live. Then there's a set of values. Like, what are the values that we should agree on as a team? Because what happens is a culture exists whether you like it or not, but you just have to surface it and be deliberate about it. So, what are the values that we are going to agree to live as? And then the foundation of all of that is, what are the goals we set? What are the objectives and key results from those goals? What are the key performance indicators from those goals? And bringing all those things together, that takes, on almost every team, takes about 4 to 6 months. And then the final piece, which is the hardest, do you have the right talent on the team? Um, you've heard, I think, Coach K from Duke say that his mom's best advice to him was, when you're younger and you get on the bus, make sure the right person's driving it. And when you're older and you're driving the bus, make sure the right people are on it. That is the hardest part, like finding the right people, because by definition, that means you're letting go of some people. And that is always gut wrenching. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, help those folks find jobs in places that they're best for them. But though that persistent problem repeats itself on every team that I've been on. I'll share with you, some of you maybe at points in your careers where you have large teams, some of you may be starting. Um, it is important. I tell my teams it is important at every level to have that. So, like, even if you're a new person on your team, you've just graduated from college and you're on your team and you realize, God, there's no sense of purpose, there's no values, there are no goals. Start asking for them. Start building them for yourself. Build it with your manager and you. When you have 5 people reporting to you, do it for your 5. Even if, like, the 1,000 other people don't have it, take care of your 5. When you have 100, take care of your 100. I've been like, the largest job I ever had was 10,500 people across 3 different time zones. Much easier to, like, set goals and functions there. But I will say do it all along, no matter what point of your career you're in.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one or two more questions before we wrap up the hour, and some takeaways that Kelly will come on to share. But how do you ascertain what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, where are you process that as well? Like, what's next on your sort of big career ambition?
It's a hard one. So, like, what I will say is what's helped me is when I was 23, I did the 5-year plan. I said, 5 years, who do I want to be? And then I would imagine that person. And then I'd imagine me and that person having a conversation in 5 years. And does that person tell me, good job, we did it? Or does that person say, man, what have you been up to the last 5 years? So I kind of set that personal thing for myself there. Now, the weird thing is you set that and then let some flexibility play out. It's like, for instance, I'll tell you at 23, I said, I want to do something in real estate, and then I'll go for my MBA and I'll learn that. I went for my MBA, but I didn't go into real estate. So, but when I met myself, like when I hit 28 and I did my self-reflection, I thought, hey, you did most of it. You got your MBA. You're actually have a really decent job at the company you're at. Now, what's the 10-year goal? And at that point, at 28 or 30, I set I want to be COO. And then work back from there around what is it that I would need to learn to be that person and made the list of what I want to learn. So the key thing I take is set the 5-year, 10-year goals, but set it so that you can create your learning agenda. Like, what is it that you want to learn and grow with? For me, it was I needed to go get my MBA. Not everybody does, but I needed to because I was an undergrad government major. I didn't know the first thing about accounting. So, but I'm working in finance, so I needed to go. Um, to be COO, I needed to have regulatory experience. I needed to have marketing. I needed to have operations. So I asked for all of those roles and I built it. And then at some point, somebody said, "Hey, do you want to run our international operations?" And it was a very easy yes because I built those things over time. Um, right now, I'm going through that same exercise. Like I'd love to be CEO of a Fortune 100, 200. Um, and then there are a few other things that are playing around in my mind, but I'm starting to do that. It's funny, like in my 20s, it was 5 years. In my 30s, it was 10. I'm going to be 50 pretty soon, so I'm back to 5 years. So I'm like, what do I want to do in the next 5 years? So anyway, thanks for asking, Michael.
Wonderful. All this information that you share is incredible takeaways for each of us to apply in our own moments and where we are in our careers. One final question, just for the fun, because I know the answer because you share in our conversations leading up to today. Why William and Mary? And I think that's a great one to end on because I think it tells a little bit about your journey, what you see in life, and what you do. So I hope that others resonate with this answer, but I'm going to ask that as our concluding one and then turn things over to Kelly to wrap things up.
Hey, thank you, Michael. It's actually a funny answer that I was almost embarrassed to share until like 10 or 15 years ago. I had to choose between William and Mary and UVA for my undergrad. And I remember going to UVA and it was beautiful, I mean, but a lot of concrete, a lot of pillars, a lot of stuff. I go to William and Mary and there's just so many more trees. And I remember thinking, I want to go here because there are more trees. And it sounds like such a funny thing, but now I'm thankful to my younger self because I made a choice based on something that made me happy. And at some point now I can articulate those values. Before it was just a feeling. And that value was I wanted to be surrounded by nature. I wanted to be surrounded by more natural things. I enjoy organic growth of relationships and natural connections and authenticity. And Michael and I talked about that because everyone on this call is incredibly, I mean, you all went to William and Mary, so you're incredibly smart. Many of us work at amazing companies. So what I usually tell folks is you'll likely not go wrong with the choice you make on IQ because you're coming from William Mary, you're likely going to like some pretty amazing firms and companies. Just make sure that company shares your values. And I know somebody asked a question about kindness. Be relentlessly kind. Like I will tell you, it may be a caricature that people at very senior positions are not kind, but I found very kind people throughout my career. And hold on to that. And the more kindness you bring, the more kindness will grow. But please, those things are not only not mutually exclusive, they have to be one and the same. You cannot be a strong leader if you're not a kind leader. But anyway, I kind of pivoted slightly. But yeah, I joined William and Mary because of the trees.
You even got the last question I wanted to ask too, so that's
Oh my
perfect. You
gosh.
covered it all. And you know what? The tree metaphor of growing and taking care of the tree and the seeds and growing into a beautiful tree is also a little metaphor of a career path, right? You can't. It's not just the full blown tree right away. You have to build it and one step at a time. So with that, I turn things over to Kelly O'Shaughnessy. Thank you so much, Oz. Really a
Of
great
course.
conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you really for sharing the knowledge and advice that you have today with the full Women Married community. We really appreciate the time and effort you put into preparing your session for today. That really had a focus on being your own champion for building a purposeful career and making sure you find ways to own your own story and find the opportunities to fit your story into where you're going rather than the other way around. Honestly, there were too many pieces of knowledge to try to wrap it up in just a couple of minutes, so I'll leave it at that. As Michael mentioned in the beginning of today's session, we are working this week to incorporate the NACE career readiness competencies. And as you definitely hit on career and self-development today with several tangible strategies on how to help us build out our own career and self-development. And so for all of our attendees today, please, what we'd love you to do is take a minute now while this is all still fresh in your head. And if you jotted down any notes, write down one or two next steps for yourself. If you have a minute as you're adding to the chat before you leave, share what those next steps are. Give a little accountability. And now I'm going to pass it over to Alex Beard, who's going to give us some of those next steps as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us today for this session. I encourage you to join us this afternoon. We have Holistic Success, the 8 Pillars of Wellness, scheduled for 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Your continued participation is greatly appreciated, so be sure to check out the full calendar of events, including Friday's online networking hour at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We've learned so many great things from Oz today. I invite you to join One Network if you have not already. That's there's a link in the chat, but it's also ONE Network at wm.edu. And there you can share your key takeaways, insights, all the great things that we've heard from Oz today. Anything that's you've gleaned, we would love to see all the stuff that happened in the chat today. We'd love to see it on One Network as a threaded chat there as well. It's a great way to meet and connect with others within our community. So thank you again, Oz. We look forward to seeing everyone at our next session. See you soon.